In September 1982, the fishing town of Craig, Alaska, became the scene of the state's worst mass homicide. A 58-foot salmon fishing boat called the Investor was found burning near Fish Egg Island, just a mile from the harbor. When rescuers boarded the vessel after the fire was put out, they discovered 8 bodies inside. Every person on board had been killed before the fire started. The Investor belonged to 28-year-old Mark Coulthurst, a respected fisherman from Blaine, Washington. He had recently purchased the boat, which was one of the most advanced and valuable vessels in the local fleet. On board with him was his wife Irene, who was also 28 and pregnant, and their 2 children, Kimberly, aged 5, and John, aged 4. The rest of the crew consisted of 4 teenage deckhands: Chris Heyman, 18, Jerome Keown, 19, Dean Moon, 19, and Michael Stewart, 19, who was also Mark's cousin. By early September, the crew had finished a successful salmon run, catching around 77,000 pounds of fish. They returned to Craig to offload their catch, refuel, and rest before the return trip home. Everyone on board was in good spirits, and they were seen around town on the evening of September 6th. They ate dinner at the dockside cafe, chatted with other fishermen, and looked forward to heading home soon. At around 10 that night, the Investor left the dock and moved a short distance away, anchoring near Fish Egg Island. No one saw what happened on the boat after that. At about 7 the next morning, thick black smoke was seen rising from the bay. A fishing boat was burning, and other crews rushed to help. When they got close, they recognized the vessel. It was the Investor. The fire was so intense that rescuers had to keep their distance. After the flames were extinguished, investigators boarded the vessel and began searching through the wreckage. What they found left no doubt that the fire was intentional and meant to cover up a mass murder. 8 people were dead. Mark and Irene Coulthurst had both been shot in the head. The rest of the victims were burned so badly they could only be identified later by dental records. Autopsies confirmed that all of them had been killed before the fire started. The crime scene showed signs of deliberate destruction. Gasoline had been used to ignite the fire. The seacocks were open, a clear attempt to sink the vessel. Investigators recovered several spent .22 caliber shell casings from the burned remains, but no firearm was found. Witnesses in Craig reported seeing a man early that morning piloting the Investor's skiff, a small motorboat used to travel between the shore and the larger vessel. He was described as being in his early 20s, slim, with light brown hair, acne scars, and wearing a red and black plaid jacket. He returned the skiff to the dock, tied it up, and walked away. No one saw where he went. The Alaska State Troopers and Coast Guard began one of the largest homicide investigations in state history. Craig was a small, isolated community with limited police resources. During the fishing season, hundreds of transient fishermen came and went, and by the time investigators arrived, many who had been in town had already left for other ports. The fire and seawater had destroyed nearly all usable forensic evidence. No fingerprints, no weapon, and no DNA could be recovered. Still, the investigation continued for months, as police tried to trace every movement of every person in Craig that week. Their attention eventually turned to one man, John Kenneth Peel. Peel was 24, from Bellingham, Washington, and had previously worked for Mark Coulthurst on another fishing boat, the Kitty M. He had been fired after a disagreement, reportedly involving alcohol or poor work performance. At the time of the murders, Peel was in Craig working on another boat called the Libby 8. He matched the description of the man seen leaving the Investor in the skiff, and had been in the same cafe as the Coulthursts the night before the fire. Investigators believed he might have held a grudge against Mark and returned to the Investor that night. They interviewed him multiple times. He denied any involvement and said he had nothing against the Coulthursts. For nearly 2 years, the state built a case against him, relying entirely on circumstantial evidence. In September 1984, John Peel was arrested and charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. The first trial began in January 1986 in Juneau. It lasted more than 6 months and cost the state millions of dollars. Prosecutors claimed Peel boarded the Investor late that night, shot everyone on board, set the boat on fire, and fled using the skiff. They said he did it out of revenge for being fired by Mark Coulthurst. The defense pointed out that there was no weapon, no confession, no fingerprints, and no physical evidence linking Peel to the crime. They also noted that eyewitness descriptions were vague and unreliable. After 11 days of deliberation, the jury could not reach a verdict. 7 jurors voted to acquit, 5 voted to convict. The judge declared a mistrial. 2 years later, in 1988, the state retried Peel with nearly the same evidence. The case again relied entirely on witness statements and circumstantial details. The defense argued that investigators had focused on Peel because they had no one else to blame. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury found John Peel not guilty on all charges. Peel was released after spending several years under suspicion. He later sued the state of Alaska for wrongful prosecution and received a settlement of about $900,000. After the acquittal, no one else was ever charged. Investigators continued to review the case for years, but could not find new evidence or identify another suspect. Several theories about the motive circulated within the fishing community and law enforcement circles. One theory suggested personal revenge, someone with a grudge against Mark Coulthurst. Another theory pointed to drug trafficking. During the early 1980s, some fishing boats were suspected of smuggling narcotics along the coast, and investigators wondered if the Investor crew might have stumbled onto something they were not supposed to see. A third theory proposed robbery or a financial dispute, though no money or valuable cargo was reported missing. None of these theories were proven, and there was no direct evidence supporting any of them. The case remains unsolved largely because of the circumstances of the crime itself. The fire destroyed nearly all physical evidence. The boat was isolated, and the delay before investigators arrived allowed critical leads to disappear. Craig's transient fishing population made it nearly impossible to track witnesses. Without a confession or forensic proof, the case could not move forward. The murders deeply affected the small community of Craig. Before 1982, violent crime there was rare. After the Investor murders, residents became far more cautious. Fishermen started locking their cabins, carrying firearms, and avoiding working with people they didn't know. For the victims' families, the loss was devastating. Mark and Irene were described by friends as hardworking and family-oriented. Their children, Kimberly and John, were known around the docks and often played near the boat. The young deckhands were just starting their adult lives, hoping to earn money for school or their own future boats. The Investor murders remain Alaska's largest unsolved homicide and one of the most perplexing maritime murder cases in the United States. 8 people were killed, the killer vanished without a trace, and despite 2 trials, no one was ever convicted. 40 years later, investigators still do not know who killed the Coulthurst family and their crew, or why. The official position of the Alaska State Troopers is that the case is closed but unresolved. The identity of the person who boarded the Investor that night, shot 8 people, and set the boat on fire remains unknown.